The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Hi, Tom Ballantyne here again, author of O'Reilly O'Reilly in Tombstone, Arizona, with my good friend Lord Christopher Monckton. Christopher, how did you get involved in the issue of the eligibility of the President of the United States being a Scotsman or an Englishman?
Well, here we are at the Trails End store in Tombstone, Arizona. Trails End, our good friends, come and look up their store. Lots of good products relating to Wyatt Earp and his team. And my purpose in being here is to have a further look at the question of whether the President of the United States is the President of the United States. Now, you may say, what has this got to do with somebody from Britain? And the first thing is, I'm not going to tell you whether the President of the United States is the President of the United States. It's not for me, as a non-expert in that, to make any pronouncement at all. I'm here because I am curious. As a peer of the realm, I'm allowed to stick my long aristocratic nose into anything I want to stick it into. And I have many interests. I'm known, for instance, to take a rather sceptical line on the question whether global warming, which is real and is happening, is going to happen at a rate which is dangerous or anything to worry about. And my conclusion on that is, on the whole, it probably isn't going to be very dangerous. But here, I'm looking at another question which has simply come to interest me, which is the question of whether or not the document that appears on the White House website at whitehouse.gov, you can go and look it up, is the real birth certificate for President Obama.
Can I ask you a specific question about that? You were not entirely informed on this issue, but you happened to be in the country, happened to be in Arizona several months ago, and learned of the Cold Case Posse investigation. There was something you saw there that apparently convinced you that there was more here than most people are admitting.
No, I was merely curious. I didn't know whether there was anything there or not. Somebody said to me, you have to watch Sheriff Arpaio's press conference of, I think, the 1st of March,
yes.
2012, when he set out, together with leading members of his Cold Case Posse, the results of his investigation. And those results were quite conclusive. I watched the investigation, I watched the press conference, partly because I wondered whether I was going to see some hick, redneck sheriff wanting to play politics with the President of the United States. And when I watched the press conference, within a couple of minutes I was captivated. Here was a sheriff, clearly very experienced, clearly very non-political, just getting on with his job. He said that he'd had 250 residents of Maricopa County who'd come to him and said they were worried that this document wasn't genuine. The constitutional implications were enormous. Would he please investigate? He didn't want to investigate, but nevertheless he decided to do so. The result of his investigations was in that press conference, and I was impressed. And
yes, Tom Ballantyne, continuing here with Lord Christopher Monckton here in Tombstone, Arizona. And Christopher, I'd like to ask you, if I can, upon deciding that you wanted to meet with the sheriff, and then having met with him, what did you in fact learn?
Well, the first thing I learned was that the sheriff was every bit as I had seen him on the video of his press conference. He was an able, quiet, thoughtful man of enormous experience, and he has been covered in decorations for being the top cop ever since he first began in the field of law enforcement, and indeed 2 of the 4 walls of his quite large office overlooking Phoenix, most wonderful view from his windows, are covered in these citations for being policeman of the year, sheriff of the year. Absolutely. This is not a man to be dismissed lightly. And when I met him, I found him to be very thoughtful, very cautious, very meticulous, very careful, and above all, very non-political. It's important to say that, because many people of a certain political faction again have tried to make out that this is purely a political investigation.
Absolutely.
Or a racialist investigation, and it is nobody less racialist than this sheriff could possibly be found.
So, if I'm understanding you, what you're saying is you did not perceive, and you had never met the man before. Some people had said that you were old buddies. You had never met him. Is that correct?
I'd never met him before I'd never seen him before until I'd seen him on that video.
So, just based on your analysis, if you will, your impression of the man, you did not find this to be a man on a political witch hunt.
Neither a political witch hunt, nor was he any kind of racist. That simply didn't enter into his thinking or into his conversation. And so I'm afraid that the view I take of the Department of Justice running a racial profiling investigation against the sheriff is that this looks very much like retaliation on the administration's part. Now, I can't, of course, say that for certain, but I think it's not an unreasonable speculation to make. The sheriff clearly has done a good job. There were clearly material things wrong with the document that appeared on the White House website. The word spacing, the line spacing, the letter spacing, the orientation of words that didn't fit the lines that surrounding them, the fact that the document could be separated into 9 or 10 separate individual layers, and on 4 of these layers appeared the 4 date stamps, 2 original and 1 certified by the registrar more recently, and the registrar stamp. Each of these on a separate layer could be moved around and turned upside down if you wanted. Clearly this was not a document scanned in from a bound volume in Hawaii, as the President's press conference had led us to believe. Instead, it was a document fabricated piece by piece using either Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop on a computer.
Safe to say then that once you viewed the evidence, once you met Sheriff Arpaio, met Mike Zullo, who is Sheriff Arpaio's lead investigator, you were fairly convinced, or at least satisfied, that there was something here that was worth, in fact, investigating.
That's right. I cannot say, not being an expert, that it is definite that there's something wrong with this document. What I can say is that when I heard the evidence, I went out and spoke myself to 2 experts in the forging of documents, one of whom I asked to forge a birth certificate for me. Not, of course, to forge it, because it had the large word specimen stamped across it so that nobody could believe that it's genuine, but I wanted to see how one would go about creating such a document.
So an American birth certificate for Lord Christopher
Hawaiian
Monckton.
birth certificate.
There you go.
And finally, on this point, having seen that expert, I also consulted another expert who said there were 17 red flags, 17 questionable items to do with that birth certificate. This man had 20 years of experience studying forged documents.
Certainly enough to convince us that this is worth pursuing, and that's exactly what Sheriff Arpaio and Cold Case Posse. Tom Valentine here again with Lord Christopher Monckton. I'm the author of O'Reilly O'Reilly most recently. We're here in Tombstone, Arizona, and we have been discussing the Cold Case Posse investigation by Sheriff Joe Arpaio of the President of the United States and his eligibility to hold office. And we have talked a little bit about the role of Sheriff Arpaio in this investigation and how Christopher became involved in this. He's not officially involved in the investigation, but how he became interested in it. And now I'd like to ask Christopher what he thinks of the role of not only the media, but the Republican, if you will, leadership in this country in sort of disparaging those who would do what Sheriff Arpaio was doing.
First point, let me emphasize yet again that I do not in any way represent the sheriff or his Cold Case Posse. I'm not a member of it. I play no part in it. And nor do I have any knowledge about this investigation other than that which the sheriff and his Cold Case Posse have already made public. I'm merely an interested party who was given, fortunately, the opportunity to meet the sheriff and some of his team a few weeks before we recorded this presentation. Now, the role of the media has been very strange. On the whole, the right-wing media, and there are not many of those, have tended to say, yes, it's quite clear the President's birth certificate is forged. The left-wing media have said, no, 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 it's perfectly clear, and that's most of the media, no, 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 it's perfectly clear that the document is all right. Now, the sheriff doesn't look at it that way, and nor do I. I do not care where the politics points. The question is that document genuine? Because if it is not, under your Constitution, your President is not your President, and every law that he has made and signed is not a real law, which means that any of the defendants in criminal cases where the offence they're alleged to have committed is under a law signed by Obama, they can say, we want the right to inspect the records of the Department of Health in Hawaii, where the original birth certificate is said to be located, so as to satisfy themselves that the document on the website really is genuine. They are fully entitled in law to do that under the case of Brady versus Maryland. So the media on the whole have not got to the bottom of this. They've taken political sides in a very childish way. As for the Republicans, they have preferred to step back from this altogether, because the Republicans these days don't have very much lead in their pencils, or in their six-shooters for that matter. They are so laid back they almost might not exist. So they haven't decided to investigate this issue, because the left very quickly said that anybody who even raised the sort of questions we're raising here was labelled a birther, just as somebody who doesn't think the climate's warming up quite at the rate we were told it's going to is a denier. They find these words, they label you, and that has frightened off the Republicans from daring to get involved with this. So, just to finish off on this point, the Republicans, therefore, have said to me that the reason why they haven't investigated this is that if Obama was knocked off his perch, then Joe Biden would become president, and they would like that rather less. I suspect the real reason is that they're frightened of harm to their reputations if they dare to raise what, in the light of the sheriff's investigation, is the perfectly legitimate question of whether we have a Manchurian candidate in the White House.
I don't think I can add any more to what Lord Monckton has just said. The reason we're here in Tombstone is because in the newly updated O'Reilly, which is about to be released, I compare the famous Sheriff Joe Arpaio to the even more famous Sheriff Wyatt Earp. So for that reason we have come here to Tombstone to conduct this interview with Lord Monckton. Lord Monckton, why are you here in Arizona?
Here I am, dressed up like something that escaped from a dude ranch. I've come here to talk to various Tea Party rallies around Arizona. I've also been in Texas. And my particular purpose in coming to Tombstone today is to ask you, who are watching this, to contribute as generously as you can to the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Posse, mcsoccp.org, mcsoccp.org. Just put those words in if you can't remember the letters. Maricopa County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Posse. This is Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who is the Sheriff of Maricopa County, has been investigating, at the request of 250 citizens of that county, the question whether or not the birth certificate that appears on the White House website for President Obama is genuine, and the posse has come to the firm conclusion that it is not. They need help to pay for further investigations. They don't want to charge this one to taxpayers. The Cold Case Posse is funded entirely by people like you who would like to reach the truth on this question and are willing to help the sheriff. So please give generously at mcsoccp.org, mcsoccp.org. Go onto that website and follow the link which will tell you how to donate via PayPal. It's very easy to do. All you need is your credit card and you can do the payment straight away. Really simple. Everything you can do to help the sheriff and his posse would be very grateful. Thank you.
Let me also make clear we are not in any way affiliated with the posse. This is a voluntary effort on our part, but we urge you to support this worthy cause. Thank you.
It's very important that you should not get in touch with the posse yourselves directly. They are inundated with public inquiries. Please don't do that. Send them some money, by all means, that will help. But don't communicate with them, because there's too many people doing that as it is. Just send them some money, keep it to that.
Thank you. God bless
The
America.
only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.